Welcome to Nightmares Incorporated, where our goal is to make your sleep anything but restful. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, entitled 43 Willow Brook Lane. Ethan Bradford stood in front of 43 Willow Brook Lane at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, sending up a silent prayer to whichever deity might be listening that he would be able to sell this house fast. He had hopes that this would be a feat easily accomplished. It was a fine house in a nice suburb just outside of New York City, with decent schools nearby. The house itself stood proudly. A colonial-style residence with crisp white siding and dark green shutters framing its tall, symmetrical windows. A charming front porch stretched across the facade, inviting quiet contemplation on sunny afternoons. A well-maintained front lawn stretched out like a verdant carpet, punctuated by bursts of color from meticulously arranged flower beds, and a mature maple tree that offered cooling shade in the summer. The driveway was freshly paved, leading to a spacious two-car garage tucked neatly to the side, with a basketball hoop mounted above for impromptu games. Inside, the home boasted airy, spacious rooms flooded with natural light pouring through oversized windows. Polished hardwood floors ran through the main living areas, and the kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, sleek granite countertops, and custom cabinets painted in a soft dove gray. A large island sat at its center, perfect for family gatherings or casual meals. Overhead, the ceiling soared, adorned with detailed crown molding and recessed lighting that added a modern touch to the classic design. The living room featured a cozy fireplace framed by an elegant mantel, promising countless charming winter evenings. Upstairs, the bedrooms were generously sized, with plush carpets and ample closet space, while the master suite boasted an en-suite bathroom with double sinks, a soaking tub, and a walk-in shower. Outside, the backyard was a private haven, enclosed by a wooden fence and featuring a stone patio complete with pergola for shade. A neatly trimmed lawn stretched to the back, where a small garden and a playset stood ready to delight children. The neighborhood itself was idyllic, with tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and a nearby park with walking trails and a playground. Truly, it was a home ready to welcome a new family and all the memories they would create within its walls. Or at least he fucking hoped so. Ethan needed to sell this house and fast. The past few months had been a relentless storm of stress for him. He had fallen behind on his car payments, each overdue notice thicker with a sense of impending doom, like a ticking time bomb on his dashboard. The once reliable car now felt like a symbol of his failure, an overly gaudy BMW that he had purchased during his first few months as a real estate agent. He had bought it to look the part, fake it until he made it, and a dozen other cliches that he had used at the time to justify the purchase. Then there was the child support, a monthly reminder of his responsibilities and his ex's growing impatience with the late payments. Every terse message from her carried an undertone of disappointment that gnawed at him, a relentless echo of his shortcomings. But the cherry on top of this disastrous Sunday was his $20,000 tax bill. It hadn't been negligence, not entirely, but in the chaos of trying to establish himself as a new agent, he'd forgotten to file his quarterly taxes. The IRS had not forgotten. Every letter, stamped in ominous black ink, brought a fresh wave of dread, as though the walls of his financial ruin were pressing closer each day. The housing market had been merciless in a city where agents were as plentiful as coffee shops, Ethan was talented, he knew he was, but talent alone wasn't enough in a world where years of connections often outweighed hard work. He'd taken the plunge into real estate, believing in the dream of flexibility and self-made success. But now the dream felt closer to a nightmare. The market was sluggish, clients either elusive or unreliable, and the pressure of competing with seasoned agents was like carrying a weight he couldn't unload. His business cards, once crisp and hopeful, now sat untouched on his desk, a reminder of stagnation. Most nights, sleep would elude him entirely. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ground beneath him crumble a little more with every passing hour. The walls of his modest apartment seemed to close in tighter as his debts loomed larger. Every phone call made his chest tighten. Every email notification carried the weight of potential bad news. He'd stopped checking his voicemail altogether, terrified of hearing yet another reminder of what he owed. Even small domestic problems, like the flickering light in his kitchen he couldn't afford to replace, reminded him of just how precarious his situation had become. And now here he was, standing at the edge of this pristine property on Willow Brook Lane, hoping, praying, that this house would be the one to save him. If he could sell this house, if he could just make this one deal, it might just be enough to keep him afloat for a while longer. The home was valued at $300,000, but was selling for $250,000, a veritable steal given its location. And seeing as he was the only agent involved in this bank-owned home, that would mean around $13,000 before his split with the broker. And although it was unlikely, Ethan was hoping that Clive would show him some mercy and take less than 50% this time. He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to focus. Today had to be different. It had to. Ethan had put everything he had into this open house. It wasn't just about the house itself. It was about creating an experience. He had stocked the kitchen with an assortment of snacks, the kind he imagined suburban families nibbling on as they strolled through the property. There were freshly baked cookies for warmth, bottled water chilling in the fridge, and even a tray of fruit skewers that he had assembled himself the night before. He had picked up balloons in shades of soft blue and ivory to match the tone of the house, their cheerful bounce adding an air of festivity to the event. Every detail mattered. He had brought his own Bluetooth speaker to play soft jazz, the kind that murmured sophistication and tranquility in his opinion. He made sure the house smelled like fresh linen and citrus, not too overwhelming, but enough to leave an impression. He had triple-checked the lighting in every room, ensuring that no corner felt dim or uninviting. And the advertising, oh, how he had hustled to get the word out. Flyers circulated around the neighborhoods, posts on every local Facebook group he could find, and even a few sponsored ads on Instagram. He'd sent a mass email to his dwindling list of contacts, hoping against hope that someone would forward it along to interested buyers. Ethan had arrived hours early, determined to make sure everything was perfect. He walked from room to room, wiping down any overlooked smudge that might detract from the house's appeal. The caffeine coursing through his system felt like a panic attack gathering its strength, but he paid it no mind. Every small gesture felt like a prayer, an offering to the real estate gods, begging for just one break, one moment of reprieve. Now, as the clock ticked closer to the event's start, he prepared for one last walkthrough. He gathered his thoughts, trying to push aside the gnawing doubt in his chest. Would anyone even show up? He had done everything he could, poured his time, his effort, and what little money he had left into this open house. He smoothed the lapels of his blazer and glanced at the mirror hanging by the front door. His reflection stared back at him, tired, but determined. "This has to work," he murmured under his breath. He forced his lips into a confident smile, hoping it might somehow convince the universe to send him what he needed, and then he proceeded with his 7th walkthrough of the morning, making sure he did not miss a single thing that might be out of place. His final walkthrough went by exactly as the previous 6 had, meticulous and uneventful. Ethan's eyes darted across every surface and corner, and each time he found nothing but perfection. Yet that perfection began to feel almost unnatural, as though he was trying too hard to mask something lurking beneath the home's pristine facade. Every gleaming appliance seemed to glint a little too sharply under the light. He briefly wondered if people would be put off by how sterile the place looked. He wondered if fruit was the best choice for a snack. Were there peanuts in those cookies he had bought? He wasn't sure if he had double-checked. God forbid someone go into anaphylactic shock because he had been negligent. Ethan began doubling back to the kitchen to check the ingredients on the cookies when he passed by the door leading to the basement. A sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It was faint, almost imperceptible. His pulse quickened. There it was again, a muffled noise, low and intermittent. It sounded like laughter. Ethan stood motionless, his hand reaching tentatively for the doorknob. The air seemed to tighten around him, thick and suffocating. His mind raced through the possibilities, grasping at rational explanations, but each one seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. Maybe it was the house settling, or some echo from outside. But why did it feel like the sound was coming from deep within, from somewhere the morning light had yet to touch? He pressed his ear against the door, the cool wood sending a jolt through his skin. The laughter, if it even was laughter, had stopped. He straightened, his breath shallow and uneven, shaking his head in an attempt to dismiss the creeping dread trying to take root in his chest. "You're just tired," he muttered, though his voice sounded hollow even in his own ears. "You're tired and nervous. That's all. So get your shit together, man." But as he reached for the doorknob, his hand trembled. The brass felt colder than it should, almost icy. He lingered for a moment, gripping it tightly as if trying to extract some courage from its unyielding surface. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, each beat a drum roll that seemed to herald something he wasn't ready to face. Gathering what little resolve he had, he twisted the knob, his breath catching as he prepared to confront whatever lay beyond. The door silently opened, revealing the faint outline of a staircase descending into darkness. Ethan hesitated, his hand gripping the door frame as though it might anchor him to safety. The sound, if it had even been real, remained absent now, leaving only silence to taunt him. Still, there was a gnawing curiosity that compelled him to move forward. Step by step, he descended, each creak of the wooden stairs resonating like a warning. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a faint, earthy smell that reminded him of damp stone and forgotten corners. He reached the bottom, his shoes brushing against the concrete floor. The dim light from the open door above barely reached the basement, leaving large swaths of the room cloaked in shadow. A single bulb hung from the center of the ceiling, casting erratic patterns of light across the walls. His eyes swept the space, searching for any sign of what might have caused the sound. There was nothing but the unfinished, yet still inviting basement that had been there the last time he had come down. The room was utterly ordinary, yet it did little to ease the tension thrumming through him. Ethan released a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own imagination. "You see, it's nothing," he told himself, the words echoing softly in the empty room. As his pulse slowed, he leaned against the wall and allowed himself a moment to collect his thoughts. His gaze wandered across the basement, his mind drifting to the strange things he had encountered in the last few months on the job. There had been that one house with the attic filled with porcelain dolls, each one arranged to face the same corner. And then there was that other place, where the previous owner had left behind a room entirely wallpapered with pages torn from old romance novels. He shivered, remembering how the words had seemed to leap off the page at him as he had walked through. And then there were the stories shared by seasoned agents over coffee or quick lunches. The house where a closet had been stuffed with hundreds of mismatched shoes, or the one where the walls of the basement had been lined with jars of teeth. Human teeth, according to the agent who swore it was true. Ethan had laughed it off at the time, though now in this dim, silent basement, those stories gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. He rubbed his temples, feeling foolish due to his own overactive imagination. "It's just a house," he murmured, his voice steadying. "All houses have their quirks." Yet as he turned to climb back up the stairs, a flicker of doubt lingered in the back of his mind, an unease from some unquiet corner of his soul. Houses hold memories, he thought for no particular reason. And some memories refuse to leave. The open house proved to be a resounding success, with Ethan expertly navigating questions and offering reassurances to potential buyers. The couple who ultimately purchased the charming home at 43 Willow Brook Lane seemed delighted, their smiles and animated conversation easing some of Ethan's lingering doubts about the property. The husband had remarked on the home's character, while the wife appeared captivated by the natural light streaming through the large bay window in the living room. When the sale closed, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Perhaps his streak of bad luck was finally ending. A month later, his optimism had grown as he managed to sell another home, this time a cozy bungalow on the outskirts of town. His quick turnaround on the house on Willow Lane and his latest sale even seemed to start catching the attention of some of the more experienced real estate agents in his office, some of whom had invited him out for drinks over the last couple of weeks. These small victories felt like the first glimmers of light piercing through the haze of uncertainty that had shadowed his recent career. He even started to picture himself regaining the sense of optimism he had had when he had first begun in real estate. Ethan started to entertain the thought that his fortunes might truly be shifting, his confidence inching back bit by bit. But just as he started to breathe easier, the phone call came in. It was his broker, their voice taut and laced with hesitation. "There's something you need to know about 43 Willow Brook Lane," they said. Ethan's stomach clenched involuntarily as the words unfolded. The couple who had bought the house, a pair of newlyweds brimming with excitement on the day he handed them the keys, had vanished. Their belongings remained inside, untouched, as if they had stepped out for an errand and never returned. A mug was still sitting on the kitchen counter, a faint lipstick smudge on its rim. The husband's leather jacket hung neatly by the door. The neighbors hadn't seen them in weeks, and now the house was being put back on the market. Ethan felt his heart pound as the details sank in. Disappearances weren't unheard of, but something about this felt strange, wrong, unsettling. He tried to convince himself it was an unrelated coincidence, a fluke with no connection to the house itself. Yet as he sat in his office staring at the listing reappearing on his screen, The unease began to creep back into his mind, curling like smoke in the corners of his thoughts. The laughter he had thought he heard coming from the basement. Was it his imagination? Or something else? "Do you think they were on the run from something?" Ethan asked Clive, his broker. "It wouldn't be the first time," Clive answered. "Maybe they realized they were in over their head, or maybe something caught up with them." "But to leave all their stuff, no forwarding address, a contact number?" Ethan pressed. "Isn't that a little strange?" "Strange, yes," Clive said. "But once again, not unheard of. I've seen it before, rookie, and you'll likely see it again if you stay in the game for any significant period of time. If you want the listing again, it's yours. Maybe you can flip it as fast as you did the first time around and keep your little hot streak going." "Okay," Ethan replied. "I'll get Claudio and his crew to clear out the house. Put the stuff in storage in case they turn up." "Good man," Clive said, and then hung up. Ethan spent a few days turning the situation over in his mind, trying to dismiss his gnawing unease. People disappear for all sorts of reasons. Financial troubles, disputes, or perhaps even the allure of starting fresh somewhere far away. The house itself wasn't to blame. It was just a coincidence, albeit a peculiar one. Still, he couldn't shake the image of the lipstick-smudged mug, or the jacket hanging by the door, abandoned like ghosts of the couple's life. Claudio and his crew had handled the clearing out of the house with their usual efficiency. Ethan had watched as they methodically packed each item, books still stacked neatly on the shelves, a wedding photo framed on the mantel, and a collection of ceramic figurines carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Everything had been boxed up and moved to storage, leaving the house spotless and eerily devoid of personality. By the third day, it stood empty once more. Ethan had scheduled a showing for later that afternoon and decided to do one last walkthrough to ensure everything was in perfect order. The house seemed eerily quiet as he moved from room to room. He adjusted a window curtain in the living room, straightened a chair in the dining room, and checked that no scuff marks marred the polished wood floors. As he stepped into the hallway leading to the basement, a faint sound reached his ears. So slight, he almost dismissed it as his imagination. He froze, straining to listen. It was soft, rhythmic, almost like the sound of breathing. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as the noise seemed to come from the direction of the basement stairs. He hesitated, every rational part of his mind insisting it was nothing, a draft, the house settling, or even an echo of his own breath. Yet an inexplicable chill crept up his spine, raising the hairs on the back of his neck. The sound didn't stop. If anything, it seemed to grow steadier, more deliberate, as if whatever, or whoever was breathing, wanted him to know that it was there. Swallowing hard, he forced himself to take a step forward, his shoes making the faintest creak on the floorboards. With each step, the sound seemed to pulse in time with his racing heartbeat. He reached the top of the basement stairs, where the light switch stood just out of reach. The shadows below loomed thick and unyielding, swallowing the faint glow of daylight that filtered through the hallway. Ethan stretched out his hand, his fingers trembling slightly, as he flicked the switch. Light flooded the basement, illuminating the space below. Once again, he only saw the bare, unfinished basement. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sound lingered. Heavier now, as though it were moving through the walls themselves. Ethan stood frozen, his breath shallow and uneven, as he tried to convince himself once more that it was nothing. Just the house settling, just the house. but the unease refused to let go, even as the sound vanished as suddenly as it had begun. By the time of the showing, these misgivings were once again placed firmly in the back of his mind. He decided that he was just unnerved by the first home buyers skipping town on him, although he had been reassured that that sort of thing happened all the time. Once again, the showing went well. He knew that the price of the house, $50,000 lower than it should have been, was attractive, but the ease of the sale once again struck him. Ethan felt a rare sense of satisfaction as he handed over the keys to the couple, a pair of city dwellers in search of serenity, their faces alight with the promise of quiet mornings and grandchildren's laughter echoing through the backyard. They had spoken warmly about their plans for the house, how they envisioned family barbecues in the sprawling backyard and quiet evenings on the porch watching the stars. They seemed solid, dependable, the kind of buyers who would bring stability to the house on Willow Lane. It was a welcome reprieve from the unsettling circumstances that had begun to shadow his work there. His commission from the sale wasn't too shabby either, a comfortable boost to his growing reputation as an agent. The months that followed blurred into a streak of success. Ethan sold 8 more homes, each sale accompanied by a growing confidence in his own ability. His name began to circulate more frequently in the agency, whispered between colleagues who now saw him as a rising star. He relished the mounting admiration, the congratulatory nods in the hallways, and even the occasional envious glance from other agents. With every successful closing, his desk piled higher with paperwork, his calendar filled with showings, and his phone buzzed incessantly with new inquiries. Willow Lane was an afterthought, buried beneath stacks of contracts and the glow of his growing reputation. But then the call from Clive came. The house was empty again. The words hit him like a splash of cold water, extinguishing the fire of his momentum in an instant. "What the fuck do you mean empty?" he asked, gripping the receiver tightly, the sudden sweat from his palms making it slip slightly against his ear. "All gone," Clive said from the other end of the line. "The furniture, the belongings, everything. No forwarding address, no explanation. It's like they just vanished." The middle-aged couple, the ones he had felt so assured about, had seemingly disappeared just like the newlyweds before them. This time, however, there were no mugs left behind on the counter, no jackets hanging by the door, no trace of their lives. The house stood naked, stripped of its inhabitants and their possessions. Ethan sat stunned, his thoughts racing through the implications. How could this happen again? Twice? What were the odds? Later that evening, Ethan found himself staring out the window of his office, his mind fixated on the house on Willow Lane. It loomed larger in his thoughts than he wanted to admit, a dark cloud creeping into the edges of his otherwise bright horizon. Something gnawed at him, a sense that he couldn't quite shake, a feeling that the house itself was somehow involved. He replayed every interaction he'd had with the couple, every detail of their move-in process, searching for some clue, some anomaly he might have missed, but nothing stood out. He told himself he was being ridiculous. Houses couldn't watch people, couldn't hold secrets, couldn't make people disappear. But then why did it feel as though the house on Willow Lane was waiting? For what, he didn't know. He told himself he was unstoppable when it came to sales. He repeated it like a mantra, a shield against the growing dread that now took root deep within his chest. You sold it before, you can sell it again. It's just a house. Just a fucking house. Get your shit together, my friend. Determined to uncover the truth, He called in another home inspector, someone with an impeccable record and a sharp eye. If there was anything amiss with that house, something he had overlooked, it was critical to find it now. The inspector arrived the next morning, stepping out of a battered white truck with Precision Home Inspections stenciled neatly on the side. He was a wiry man with steely gray eyes, a quiet demeanor, and an aura that radiated professionalism. Clad in a dark vest full of tools, he carried a clipboard and a sense of meticulousness. The kind of person who would notice a nail out of place. Ethan greeted him with a firm handshake, though his palms were damp with nervousness. For the next couple of hours, the inspector poked, prodded, and measured every corner of the house with unhurried precision. He crawled into the attic, examined the wiring, tapped on walls, and even inspected the boiler with almost reverent care. Ethan trailed behind him, trying to suppress the mounting anxiety that each passing moment of silence seemed to amplify. The occasional creak of the wooden floors and the hollow echo of their footsteps only added to the oppressive atmosphere. Once finished, the inspector delivered his findings.
"There's nothing structurally wrong with the house,"
he said flatly, flipping through his notes.
"No mold, no pests, no leaks. Walls are straight, roof's intact, electrical and plumbing check out. Everything's fine."
He paused, his brow knitting up slightly as he glanced at one of the pages on his clipboard.
"Although, I did notice something odd about the paperwork."
Ethan's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?"
"Well, the building permit lists the house as constructed in 1995. That's what all the documentation says. But the basement and foundation don't align with that timeline. They're older, far older. I'd say 1950s or possibly even before that. My guess, the original records were either lost or destroyed, and someone used the date of a later inspection as a placeholder."
Ethan frowned, a knot tightening in his stomach. "So, there's no definitive proof of when the house was actually built?" The inspector shrugged.
"No, but that's not uncommon. It doesn't affect the integrity of the building."
His tone remained matter-of-fact, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was another piece of a puzzle he didn't yet understand. Later that afternoon, Ethan decided he couldn't leave it at that. He needed to see for himself. Retracing the inspector's steps, he performed his own walkthrough, scouring every room with newfound scrutiny. The house felt different now, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for him to leave, or to find something it didn't want him to see. The air seemed charged with an unspoken tension, and the faint smell of dampness lingered in the basement, despite the inspector's reassurance of its soundness. When he entered the smallest bedroom on the second floor, his breathing abruptly caught in his throat. There, half embedded in the wall near the closet, was a teddy bear. Its fur was worn, patches missing entirely, and one glossy black eye stared back at him while the other was lost. The bear wasn't hung or placed, it was fused into the structure, as though the wall had grown around it over time. The faded fabric looked ancient, with threads unraveling at the seams, and a faint musty odor clung to it. Ethan stepped closer, his fingers brushing the surface of the wall around it. The plaster felt cold, almost damp to the touch, and the edges where the teddy bear met the wall were seamless, as though it had been there for decades. His mind raced, grasping for a logical explanation. That wasn't there before, he thought, his mind baffled. No fucking way it was. We would have seen it. He jerked his hand back, the air in the room suddenly feeling colder. The faint sound of a creak echoed through the house, though he knew no one else was there. He tried to shake off the unease, but the bear seemed to stare at him, its single eye glinting in the dim afternoon light streaming through the window. Ethan stared at the bear for a long moment before pulling out his phone. He intended to take photos, but when he raised his phone, the bear was gone. Ethan backed out of the room as though the house itself was watching him. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and made his way downstairs.
I'm losing my damn mind, he thought. That's gotta be it. I'm cracking up. There was no bear, never was. You hallucinated, just like the sounds from the basement.
Of course, that had to be it. Maybe the stress of success, which is sometimes as bad as the stress of failure, was getting to him. Things were moving fast around him now, his career climbing and even his relationship with his ex-wife improving.
Maybe you're just worried you're gonna fuck it up somehow, and the people taking off on the house is just adding to that. That's all. It's all in your head, bucko.
Ethan, determined to not leave any stone unturned regarding the house, decided to find out which agent had handled the property before him. By that evening, he had the name and number he needed. He dialed the number of the previous agent, Roger Van Horven, who had handled the property before him. Roger, a retired real estate agent with over 40 years of experience, answered with a gruff but polite tone, his voice carrying the weariness of someone well acquainted with unsettling houses. When Ethan inquired about the house at 43 Willow Brook Lane, Roger seemed unsurprised that it had sold again.
That place? Sold him maybe a dozen times in the last decade. It's not unusual. It happens with some properties. Some houses just never seem to keep owners for long,
Roger remarked, his voice calm, almost dismissive. Ethan could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling in the background, as though Roger was sorting through old files. Ethan pressed further, asking if Roger had ever experienced anything strange while dealing with the house. There was a pause, a brief hesitation that Ethan could not ignore.
"No, can't say I have,"
Roger replied after a moment, though Ethan thought he detected a subtle uneasiness in the older man's voice, almost as though he were withholding something. The pause lingered uncomfortably, the silence between them feeling heavier than it should. Shaking off his suspicion, Ethan chalked it up to his own anxiety and thanked Roger before hanging up. The conversation left him with a lingering sense of discomfort, his thoughts circling back to that faint hesitation in Roger's voice. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if Roger had seen something, but chose not to share it. Still, Ethan resolved not to let the unease consume him. After all, it was just a damn house. How much power could it truly hold over him? He planned his next steps methodically. Sessions with a therapist, someone who specialized in anxiety disorders, and the help of prescription medication to calm his mind and quell the unease that had begun to shadow his days. Even as the days passed, however, the memory of the teddy bear fused into the wall lingered, a stubborn enigma that refused to fade. Over the next few weeks, Ethan distanced his mind from the house on Willow Brook Lane, the combination of therapy and pills seeming to calm his mind and remove his unease surrounding the property. It sold again, this time to a family of 3, and Ethan continued his upward trajectory. Ethan's life took on a new rhythm over the following year, one that was surprisingly steady, even fulfilled. At first-rate real estate, his knack for sealing the deal even earned him the nickname the Closer. It started as a casual remark by a colleague after Ethan managed to sell a property that had been languishing on the market for months, but the name stuck, and soon it became part of the office vernacular. Ethan couldn't help but feel a swell of pride whenever someone used it, proof that his diligence and charm weren't going unnoticed. His days were packed, but the hours he spent selling houses were far easier than they had been in the past. Therapy and medication had steadied his nerves, lending him a clarity he hadn't felt in a while. His confidence grew, and with it his client list. The irony of his success didn't escape him, especially as he managed to sell the house at 43 Willow Brook Lane not once, not twice, but 4 times over the course of the year. Each new owner brought their own optimism to the property, yet none lasted more than a few months. The last family, a couple with a toddler, stayed for 3 months before moving out abruptly. Ethan had stopped asking too many questions about the house. It sold easily enough, and beyond that, he preferred not to know. Outside of work, Ethan's personal life blossomed in ways he hadn't anticipated. He grew closer to his daughter, who had just turned 12 and was navigating the tumultuous world of middle school. Their weekends together became more frequent and more relaxed, filled with trips to the park, movie nights, and long conversations over pizza about her favorite books and the trials of middle school drama. Ethan found himself savoring these moments, committing her laughter and bright-eyed curiosity to memory like treasures he had nearly lost. To his surprise, his relationship with his ex-wife also began to mend. What started as co-parenting discussions turned into longer conversations, then shared laughter, and finally, tentative dates. They were cautious, both aware of the pitfalls that had unraveled their marriage the first time around, but there was a warmth between them that hadn't been there in years. Amanda even remarked once that Ethan seemed lighter, as if he'd finally let go of a weight he'd carried for too long. He didn't tell her about the house, or the strange unease it had sewn into the fabric of his life. That was a story for another time, if ever. As his career and relationships flourished, Ethan made a bold decision. He moved out of his apartment and bought a house of his own. It wasn't grand or opulent, but it was comfortable, with a small garden in the back where Lily could play and a porch where he could sit in the evenings, sipping coffee and watching the world go by. The act of purchasing his own home felt like a declaration, a statement that he was leaving the ghosts of his past behind and building something solid and enduring. And yet, even after all this time, there were still moments when the memory of 43 Willow Brook Lane crept into his thoughts. Every time he signed a new contract for the house, he wondered about its peculiar hold on people. On him. The teddy bear fused into the wall, the faint hesitation in Roger's voice, the way no family ever stayed too long. It all lingered at the edge of his consciousness, like a puzzle he refused to solve. But Ethan had learned to quiet those thoughts, to focus on the tangible joys before him, his daughter's smile, the laughter he shared with Amanda, the sense of accomplishment that came with every new sale. Life, for the first time in years, felt manageable, even hopeful. And so the house on 43 Willow Brook Lane continued its peculiar cycle, and Ethan continued to thrive, each sale of the property a reminder of how far he had come. For a time, that was enough. Yet there was one nagging question that kept blooming in the back of his mind, like a stubborn rash that refuses to go away. And the question was this: where had all of those people gone? By Ethan's count, 17 people had gone into that house since he had first begun handling it. Out of that 17, not a trace had been seen of any of them. Sometimes all the furniture was left behind. Other times the house was as bare as the first day he walked into it. No forwarding numbers had been left, no addresses, no one contacting the office with complaints about the property or asking about the personal effects that had been left behind. In Ethan's experience, that's not how people worked. That was too many folks to simply vanish into the wind without so much as a "fuck you, there was black mold in the bathroom and you'll be hearing from our lawyer" at least once. So where did they go? He tried to ignore this question, tried to drown it in pills, in therapy, in reveling in his success and improving personal life. But he couldn't. People don't just vanish. They had to have gone somewhere. And how could so many people abandon the same house, even before his time, with no reason ever given? That was why, when the latest buyers, a retired couple who had bought it outright, left the property abandoned, Ethan felt the old unease creep back into his mind. After receiving the news about the latest abandonment, Ethan found himself standing in front of 43 Willow Brook Lane the following morning. The neighborhood was quiet, unnervingly so, and as he approached the house, he noticed that the lawn was still meticulously maintained, as if the grass were little more than astroturf. The house sat in eerie silence, its windows dark and empty. Ethan stepped inside. The hallway stretched before him, dim and unnaturally still. His breath came in slow, measured respirations. The air felt heavier than he remembered, thick and damp, like the inside of a forgotten cave. He hesitated in the foyer, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. Shadows seemed to cling to the corners, writhing and shifting as the morning sun came through the window and swept over them. He wasn't sure if it was the house or his own nerves playing tricks on him. Room by room, he searched every corner, every wall, and even scrutinized the floor, searching not just for a sign of the most recent buyers, but for anything that could explain the house's peculiar history. The kitchen counters were still spotless, as if untouched save for a faint layer of dust that glistened under the morning glare. The living room was empty, silent, except for the faint sound of dripping water coming from somewhere deeper within. He paused near the walls, running his fingers along their surface. When he knocked on them, he swore he could hear faint, hollow reverberations, as though something was hidden within. The upstairs bedrooms offered no answers, only more questions. The rooms were stripped bare, and the closets held nothing but a lingering scent of old wood and damp fabric. The windows seemed to warp slightly, their glass reflecting distorted images of the dimly lit rooms. Each step Ethan took seemed to echo louder, as if the house wanted him to know he wasn't alone. After a thorough search of the main levels, Ethan ventured down into the basement. As Ethan reached the bottom of the stairs, his eyes scanned over the damp concrete walls. That was different. There hadn't been any moisture down here before that he had seen. An oppressive cold wrapped around him like a shroud, and the faint scent of mildew mingled with something sharper, metallic. He hesitated, his breath clouding in the now frigid air, before directing his gaze to the center of the basement. His eyes swept across the floor, and for a fleeting moment, he froze. Bones. Not just one, not just a fragment, but a scattering of pale, jagged shapes strewn across the concrete like the remnants of some grotesque puzzle. They gleamed faintly in the artificial overhead light, a chilling juxtaposition to the dark, damp surroundings. Some were small, delicate, too small to be human, while others were unmistakably larger, their shapes jagged and splintered as though gnawed upon. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest as he knelt to examine them more closely, his mind already racing through a dozen terrifying possibilities. The longer he stared, the more his sense of reality wavered. Were they truly there? Or had the oppressive atmosphere of the house already begun to twist his perception? He extended a hesitant hand towards the nearest fragment, his fingers trembling as they brushed its surface. It was real, cold and solid, with a texture that sent a shiver coursing through his body. Ethan blinked, his head swimming with a sudden vertigo that seemed to seep out of the basement itself, twisting his grip on reality. As his vision seemed to flicker, the concrete walls began to ripple, their texture softening and warping before his very eyes. The once cold rigidity of the basement transformed grotesquely, the surfaces taking on the appearance of pulsating flesh, molted in hues of pink and deep bruised purples. It spread like a living plague, consuming the sterile mundanity of the room and replacing it with something far more sinister. The ceiling sagged, bulbous and gleaming with a slick, foul liquid that dripped steadily onto the floor. No, not a floor anymore, but a spongy, uneven surface that squished faintly under his shoes, each droplet hitting the ground emitting a faint hiss, a sound that seemed to echo endlessly, bouncing around him as though the walls themselves were alive, exhaling in shallow gasps. Ethan staggered backward, shaking in fear as the shadows congealed in the corners, morphing into dark, amorphous shapes that writhed like they were tethered to the pulsating, fleshy walls. Teeth, no, fangs, began to sprout from the walls and the ceiling, an oil-like substance oozing from where they emerged. The scent of decay and excrement filled the air, and from the amorphous shapes within the shadows, Ethan began to hear the cries of people in agony and terror. And then it was just a basement again. But this time, Ethan obeyed his senses. Turning on his heels, Ethan bolted for the staircase in a blind panic that was akin to when he had been a child and was convinced there was something hiding under his bed. The edges of his vision swam, and the dim bulb overhead flickered erratically, casting distorted shadows that only deepened his mounting panic. Each step carried him closer to the promise of escape, yet the walls of the narrow staircase seemed intent on slowing his ascent. At first they appeared solid, white paint over unblemished sheetrock. Then, as if his desperate flight disturbed some unseen balance, they began to twist and ripple, the familiar eggshell morphing into the grotesque, pulsing flesh that had overtaken the basement. Purplish hues blossomed like bruises, veins snaking along the surface and throbbing faintly as though the walls harbored some malevolent heartbeat. Ethan stumbled, his hand shooting out to steady himself against the banister, only to recoil in horror as it became slick and warm under his touch, the texture searing into his memory. The faint hissing sound returned, accompanied by the whisper of voices, as though they were murmured directly into his mind. He gritted his teeth and pushed onward, forcing himself to focus on the faint rectangle of light at the top of the stairs. With each step, the transformation of the walls seemed to intensify, then falter. One moment, the staircase was a claustrophobic tunnel of flesh, the walls sprouting jagged teeth that seemed to gnash at the air. The next, it was just a dimly lit passage, almost laughably ordinary. Yet the transitions were never complete, always accompanied by a nauseating sense of vertigo that threatened to send him sprawling back into the nightmare below. Ethan's foot slipped on the uneven surface of the top step, a sensation both spongy and solid, and he lurched forward, catching himself barely in time. The sound of his shoe squelching against the ground echoed unnaturally, the noise warping as though it were being swallowed and regurgitated by the air itself. From behind him, he could hear something heavy bounding up the stairs at his heels. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Ethan burst into the living room, his chest heaving as he gulped in deep breaths of what he thought would be fresh air. For a fleeting moment, the room appeared untouched, its white walls glowing faintly in the mild morning light, the clean edges of furniture standing as a stark contrast to the chaos he had just escaped. Relief flirted at the edges of his mind, but it was a cruel, fleeting tease. The first crack in his illusion of safety came as a low, guttural rumble that reverberated through the room like a distant earthquake. Ethan froze, his body instinctively tensing as his eyes darted to the walls. There, the first distortion appeared, a faint ripple in the paint as though the wall itself had just taken a breath. And then, as if responding to some unspoken command, the pristine surface of the walls began to bulge grotesquely. Dozens of large mouths pushed forward from beneath the smooth veneer, their outlines stretching and distorting the once perfect whiteness. The mouths were enormous, impossibly wide, with jagged, uneven teeth that jutted out at chaotic angles like shards of broken glass. Their gums were raw, inflamed red, glistening as though slick with saliva. The wall itself seemed to quiver, as if struggling to contain the horrific forms seeking to break through. The sounds of screams filled Ethan's ears, buffeting him with the sense of pain and fear that the dozens of missing souls must have felt as the house had come alive and devoured them whole. Ethan burst through the front door, the sunlight outside searing his eyes as he stumbled down the porch steps, nearly collapsing onto the sidewalk. His lungs burned, each breath a desperate gulp of air that carried no relief, only the acidic taste of adrenaline and terror. He dared not look back, but some primal, inexplicable instinct gnawed at him, demanding that he turn around, that he stand firm and confront what hunted him even now. Finally, as though compelled by a force beyond his own will, Ethan stopped and pivoted sharply on his heels. The house loomed before him. No, not a house. For a brief, horrifying instant, the veil of reality wavered, and he saw what was truly there. What stood at 43 Willow Brook Lane defied comprehension. The facade of the quaint suburban home dissolved, replaced by something vast and ancient, something alive. The structure writhed and twisted, its form shifting as though caught in an endless metamorphosis. Its surface was slick and pulsating, an amalgamation of flesh, stone, and shadow that emanated a sickly, otherworldly glow. Great spires jutted from its form like jagged bone, twisting upward into the sky before curling inward, as if to pierce the heavens themselves. They almost looked like vines, as thick as a tree trunk, all of them pulsating slightly as if imbued with malignant life. Eyes, hundreds of them, no, thousands, opened across its surface, each one impossibly large and unnervingly small all at once. Each gaze locking onto Ethan with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. Their pupils shifted and expanded like black holes, pulling at the edges of his vision, threatening to draw him into their infinite depths. The sounds of the house returned, no longer muffled whispers or guttural rumbles, but an orchestra of raw anguish, a cacophony of screams, wails, and laughter so insane that it clawed at his mind. And then it was a house again. Just a plain upscale home within the suburbs. A place where you could easily imagine raising a family or escaping the nonstop rush of the city. It's not a house, Ethan thought to himself. I don't know what the fuck it is, but it is not a goddamn house. All of those people, his mind began, but couldn't finish as he bent over and dry-heaved, the images of people being grabbed by long, thin tongues and pulled into the walls and down into the basement to be eaten alive by those horrific jaws he had seen. Destroy it, he thought once the dry-heaving had ceased. You gotta destroy it. Burn it down or something. 5 gallons of gasoline in the living room and a match should do the trick. Would that work? Was there actually any wood to burn? Or was the whole image of a house just an illusion? A trick played by something that sat in wait until its intended prey walked willingly into its maw. What if it comes to life when you try to burn it? His mind yammered. Likely it will defend itself, unless it does have nothing to fear from the fire. Fuck that, his mind continued. You have to try. Yet, conflicting with these thoughts were equally convincing counter-arguments. Your good fortune started when you first sold this house, this part of his mind stated. You've made, $75,000 selling this property over the past year alone? Not to mention the ease you've experienced selling other properties. Your family life is coming back together. This place has brought you nothing but good luck. If you defy it, maybe all that'll end. Even if the thing that hides behind the facade doesn't devour you for what it would likely see as a betrayal. How many times have you been inside that house? This seductive voice went on. How many times could it have harmed you? But it didn't. It always let you go. And your life has been nothing but better since you first came here. Do you really want to risk all that? It's been letting me go because I've been feeding it, Ethan argued, his gorge rising once again. All of those people. Did you kill them? The voice asked plainly. Do you even know if they're dead? Are you positive about what you think you saw in there? You're not forcing anyone to buy it. You only facilitate the sale, nothing more. What happens after you sell the property isn't on you. You're just the middleman. No, I have to, Ethan began to assert, but didn't finish. What did he have to do? What could he do?
"Excuse me,"
a voice called out, breaking into Ethan's internal struggle. He turned and saw a pleasant-looking family of 4, the father being the one to address him.
"Excuse me,"
the man repeated.
"Are you here to look at the property too? We saw it online and had to come to see if it was for real, given the price seems way too low."
For a moment, Ethan only stared at the family. The father, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and khakis, had an approachable demeanor, his expression a mixture of curiosity and enthusiasm. Beside him stood the mother, her warm smile framed by a cascade of dark hair, holding the hand of a young boy, no older than 8, who clutched a toy car tightly. Just behind them, a teenage girl with headphones looped around her neck surveyed the scene with mild disinterest, but a glimmer of intrigue in her eyes.
"Tell him to run,"
Ethan thought.
"Tell him to get as far away from this fucking place as possible. Tell him..."
Tell them what? What had he seen exactly? The words of the other voice in his mind came back to him, speaking plainly.
"You haven't hurt anyone. You only make the offer. They choose of their own free will. You're not responsible."
As if watching himself in a dream, Ethan heard his own voice, clear, confident, and not betraying a hint of his inner turmoil and fear.
"No, I'm a real estate agent. This is actually one of my listings."
Maintaining the dreamlike quality, Ethan saw himself put his hand out in greeting, a warm, practiced smile lighting up his face.
"Ethan Bradford, first-rate real estate,"
he said as the other man accepted his handshake.
"Would you like me to show you around?"
As Ethan walked back up the sidewalk to the front door of the house that sat at 43 Willow Brook Lane with the family in tow, something ineffable that dwelt within the blind spots in human perception let out a contented sigh, even as it shivered with anticipation. Thank you for joining us here at Nightmares Incorporated, and we hope to see you again next time when we bring you another original story. Until then, sweet dreams.